Wayne Greenhaw is an Alabama institution. His latest book, The Long Journey, is his 16th volume of prose, fiction and nonfiction. As a journalist, Greenhaw covered Alabama politics and broke the story of the My Lai Massacre. He has written about the drug trade, the rise of the Republican Party in the South, Mexico, and country music. Greenhaw writes nearly every day and has all his life.
I was thinking the other day that I wrote my first book when I was 16, sophomore in high school, and about a 120-page novel that I wrote early in the mornings. And I think I wrote 6 horrible novels before the first good novel was published, finally.
When you were in high school, were you, by that time, living in Tuscaloosa?
Yeah.
You were raised all over North Alabama, though, weren't you? 2 or 3 different places?
Yeah. I was born in Sheffield, actually. My parents were living in Town Creek, a little town just down the road from the Tri-Cities. And then we were there. And then I moved down to Shelby County with my grandparents after a while, and then to Trussville, and then finally Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, and then stayed on for the university.
Yeah.
You're one of those people who enjoyed the mentorship, the tutelage of Hudson Strode.
Hudson Strode.
And we have talked about him before, but let's take a moment to reminisce about Hudson Strode. You wanted to be a writer before you met him. We can't say he inspired you exactly.
No, but I knew who he was growing up. And when I was a kid, I was one of my first jobs was sacking groceries, at the Jitney Jungle in Tuscaloosa. And I would sack his groceries, and I'd always eye him and Mrs. Strode, And then later, when I got to know him, Miss Strode, she would say to me, you were such a nice young man when you were doing our groceries. None of them are that nice anymore. But they were kind of oddball to me. I mean, I was just a country boy. Grew up in the country. My daddy was a traveling salesman, sold barber and beauty supplies. My mother was a self-educated woman who read everything she could possibly read, did not go to college until she was an adult, and went to night classes at the University of Alabama. And she taught secretarial school. And so being around the Strodes, there was this sophisticated couple who'd been all over the world and knew kings and dropped every big name right and left all the time. And I was just, of course, taken with them.
Well, I only knew him just at the very end of his life, by which time Tuscaloosa was a pretty big place. The university was a bigger place. Well, I mean, was he really a celebrity when he walked into the Jitney Jungle? Did people...
Yeah. I mean, he when he walked anywhere, he strode in. I mean, he walked with great dignity and pride, and he talked that way. He was he had almost like a radio personality, a big voice and a big personality. Not always ingratiating. I had a love-hate relationship with him. I didn't like everything about him. He could be a real ass, but for the most part, what he was a great cheerleader, and he would come out with these wonderful sayings, that you could just grab a hold of, like you must have stickability. More than talent, stickability counts, if you stay with it. Writing is a tough game, and a lot of people write one book and that's it. And but you stick with it and stick with it and stick with it, and something happens.
You have stuck with it.
I have.
I've over time I've read books of yours one at a time, and then recently looked through and caught up with some I hadn't seen before, and my goodness, there's a pile of them, and they're in a lot of nonfiction and several books now, more and more fiction it looks like. But let's talk about the different places that you've gone for subject matter. I mean, you must have, 10 books of nonfiction, surely?
Yeah, I guess so. At least I'm not sure how many. The first one was the My Life story, the Lieutenant William Calley.
Well, how did you happen to do that?
I was a reporter for the Alabama Journal in Montgomery, and I had covered civil rights, done a lot of civil rights work, and I knew this young, he was a JAG Corps guy in the Pentagon, and he heard about Calley and this situation where this young lieutenant was being held at Fort Benning, and he called me or called a friend of mine who was a civil rights lawyer, and the lawyer called me and said, "You need to call this kid, this guy up at the Pentagon." That's the way I discovered it. And then I talked my editor into going to Fort Benning and wrestle the story over there. I crossed paths with Seymour Hersh a number of times. And I actually signed up Calley to do his book, to do his autobiography, which I felt like at the time was the important story of the Vietnam War. And I think it really was.
Well, there have been lots of other subjects, and one that I'm interested in, because I think you were one of the first on the ground with it, was this whole business of drugs in Alabama. In fact, I was very amused at one time, wasn't it Madison Jones who called you and asked you about
oh yeah
for information on the drug trade in Alabama?
Well, actually he took a chapter of Flying High,
Yeah.
which was a chapter about a drug bust and a smuggling operation over close to Auburn. And he called me and asked me if he could use that, write a novel, which he did, and gave me, credit for it and that sort of thing.
So what was going on that you sort of unveiled there?
This started as a series, a newspaper series for the Journal and the Advertiser in Montgomery. It was to be a 5-part series, and it turned out to be about a 12-part series. I went from one end of the state to the other, discovered there was a heck of a lot more drugs than anybody thought about there being, and this was 1968. And then later, I became interested in it because I was teaching out at Maxwell, at the federal penitentiary out there, and a lot of my students were drug busts, and they had been involved in drugs from one end to the other, and after a couple of them got out, they called me and they said they had all this information they wanted me to have, and I went to them and got all this stuff, and then they introduced me to other people. And actually it turned out to be a book about drugs from New York to across the Midwest, all the way down to Colombia, Guajiro Peninsula. I got in with the DEA, and they flew me down over Mexico, showed me how they really ran the drugs all the way up. And of course, Alabama played a big hand in that because we were a landing area for a lot of the drug people.
And why was Alabama useful to the drug pilots?
Well, all of these little small abandoned airstrips all over the place in Alabama. Alabama, because of its location, all the way back World War I, actually, started airfields around Montgomery. And after that, World War II, had a lot of the training pilots would touch and go around Alabama. So we had a lot of landing strips, a lot of rural landing strips here. A lot of landing strips and plantations and that sort of thing. Really, really very sophisticated.
And very handy, and
Yep.
nobody watching.
Right.
Did you get the impression that the drugs were passing through Alabama, or that the drugs were for Alabama?
Most of them were passing through. I mean, there's a market here, but it's not like Atlanta or any of the big cities, and that's where the markets are, and that's where they take it to.
You've found one subject after the next here in Alabama, and one of the subjects is, and you've written about this different ways, fiction and nonfiction, is music. You have a novel about
King of Country
King
was
of Country.
King of Country. It started off. It was to be a fictionalized biography of Hank Williams, And then I started writing that, and I said, you know, my goodness, that's not the story. That I have my own character, my own person that I want to write about, and I can't really write about Hank. Other people have written biographies of Hank. I knew a lot about him. I had a friend one time who came in and spent 2 weeks here, and then went home and wrote a biography of Hank Williams, and I thought, my God, you know, he mostly talked to me, and I should have written the book to begin with. It's back in the 60s. But no, the book is about the business as I knew it. I spent time up in Nashville in the early 60s with Roger Miller and Jim Reeves, and I knew the industry and knew the people. And when I started writing about it the second time, I created my own character, Bobby Lee Butler, who in the beginning of the book, he discovers when he's 12 years old that Hank is dead. And he had known Hank from down in the country, down around Georgiana. And I had actually met Hank once when I was a little boy, traveling with my daddy in a drugstore in Georgiana. As far as I know, it was Georgiana, some small South Alabama town. He bought us a Coke and gave me a couple of records, which I did not like at the time at all. And it took many years for me to start really appreciating country music, or at least his kind of country music.
Something that you and I have talked about it informally at different times, and that, in fact, I think even right here in this town, and that is, why is it that people think that they can fly into Montgomery or fly into Tuscaloosa and spend 2 weeks and leave as an expert on George Wallace, or an expert on civil rights in Birmingham, or an expert on Hank Williams? What is it about Alabama that causes people to think they can learn it all overnight?
Well, it's not just Alabama. It's a kind of a journalist's way of doing things, you know, and they think that they can become instant experts on.
You just resent
whatever.
it when it's Alabama.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's my territory. Yeah. You know. How dare they come here and do that to me? But no, but people have been doing that for years and years, and they do it other places. I've even done it some places. I never have become an instant expert. I haven't found that magic yet, but it's interesting to me to see them do it. But they do it in Alabama for some reason.
Well, it's Zelda Fitzgerald, or it's Hank Williams, or it's Tallulah, or it's the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or it's Bull Connor.
Yeah. But
in a very short time, people feel qualified to you know,
but you know,
expound.
The real people who really write about it, I mean, like Diane McWhorter, for instance. I mean, she spent years and years and years writing that book, and she would come in and out of Alabama so many times, and of course she's from Birmingham. It's those people, and I've been here most of my life. I've had many chances to leave, or used to have. I don't anymore. I don't care about leaving anymore. I mean, other than leaving for a couple of weeks. But I mean, this is home, and I made it that, and I think it's worthwhile to do that to a place, make it your home, and feel it inside and out. You know.
A couple of years ago, you published a book, Beyond the Night, and I remember you telling me that it was making something of a hit with new age readers, and that it was selling in California.
Yeah.
And I remember asking you then, is this fiction or nonfiction? And I don't remember the answer. It's a little dream book.
Well, it is a dream book, and it's as I told you, it's real as I remember it. But how do we remember dreams, and what are those dreams, and is it a dream or isn't it a dream? It's a kind of a thing that just came back to me, that had occurred to me at the time. Now, whether that, I know it didn't actually happen.
Good.
But we're filled with dreams all the time. I mean, particularly writers with imagination, particularly young people with imaginations, and particularly when you had a father like mine who told stories all the time. When we would would ride somewhere where there's daylight or dark, he would tell stories. And in this instance, my grandfather had just died, his father. We were on our way up to Town Creek to his funeral, and we went through the forest, Bankhead Forest. And it always fascinated me, this forest, with its shadows and its colors and its, I could imagine everything happening there, the goblins and the ghosts and the tales of Rube Burrow and his gang hiding out in the hills. And Daddy would tell us all of these stories, and he would never fill in all of the gaps. He'd let us go with it. And I have discovered late in life, I guess, that stories that my father told me back 50 years ago are all of a sudden just blossoming in my head. And it's magic, you know, the way he did this. And well, he planted something that's now growing.
Well, this little boy sort of talks to the animals and communicates with various creatures in the natural world.
Right.
And you remember this, do you?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I talk to the animals.
I want to talk about your essays, but as long as we're talking about something that's imaginative, fanciful, let's talk about your book. It's barely out. You have a copy today,
right?
But
First
it's not even available to the public yet.
Right.
The long journey.
Yeah.
This book, whether people like it or not, there's a boy who's traveling to meet his brother who's returning from a Veterans Administration hospital after World War I. The book is set in 1919.
Right.
And he sets out, and he's got a horse and a mule, if I remember, and he's setting out to go to Decatur,
right,
to meet his brother. Right. Well, he meets up along the road with an Irishman dressed in a Confederate war uniform with the rank of sergeant, and a Greek immigrant who has a balloon.
Right.
Now, I have to tell you, I read that, I thought, my God, what is this? This little menagerie he's created on this dirt road in North Alabama.
Right.
Where did you get the Irishman in the uniform, and where did you get the Greek with the balloon?
Well, here again, it just that's imagination.
1919.
1919. I got the story from a little tale that my father had told us when we were small. He said that he had been sent by his father from Town Creek to Decatur to pick up his older brother coming home from World War I. Actually, his brother was in World War I. I knew all of this. I don't think Daddy was ever sent over there because he would have had to have been about 9 years old in 1919. But nevertheless, he would tell us these stories like that would leave it wide open for us. And I imagined all of these things that happened. What could possibly happen to a young man, and I made him 16. Nearly 17, leaving home, sent out for the first time. I mean, Town Creek is a small place today. It was a small place in 1919, a very small place. And the character of Harold is my father, Harold, as I imagined him at that age. He was a barber, and he did shine shoes, and he was industrious. His father was a very tough Presbyterian Scotsman, you know, and who pinched pennies, and my dad was anything but a penny pincher. But my father also had a wild streak in him and a glint in his eye at all times, and he was always out for a good time. And he was also serious to a certain point, and particularly when other people made fun with him. And I thought, well, you know, first of all, here's a lad on this road, and what the hell is more boring than somebody traveling with a mule and a horse 30-something miles across North Alabama? But I looked into this situation of there were people out there, circus performers who went from little town to little town. There were people with hot air balloons who went from place to place, put on their shows, made their bits of money here and there. There were itinerant musicians. There were even, of course,
the Irishman is a fiddler.
Yeah, the Irishman is a fiddler, and then he runs into a buddy of his that he had known in Memphis later in the book, and they joined together and formed themselves a little entertainment group for the nightclubs on the river bank in Decatur.
What I thought in that book, the place where I thought, Wayne is having some fun here, was taking that boy into Moccasin Alley and getting him his first beers and getting him his first women. That was it fun to corrupt that boy in your book?
Oh, absolutely. Sure. I mean, we all have this sort of thing that happens to us. It happened to me when I was 18 in Mexico. It was just different. It was for this kid, and his father tells him, before he leaves home, don't go to Moccasin Alley. And of course, he has to go to Moccasin Alley. Any father tells son not to go somewhere, and he lets him go there, he's going to go. And he does.
Do you suppose the father knows that when he says, don't go to Moccasin Alley, that is setting the boy up to go there?
Probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
That too.
And at the end of the book, the mirrors that go back in time to the beginning of it, and with the dad, and then of course his landlady, and all of these places that I talk about in the book, that I describe in the book, where they go, like the tavern, which was this wonderful hotel in Decatur.
Where his landlady takes him.
Where his landlady takes him for lunch.
Very upscale place.
Very upscale. Top dollar meal, gourmet dinners. People would come from Atlanta, from Nashville, from big cities all over the South to eat there. It later burned just a few years later. But then also the resort they go to, the Cave and the Winds, and actually existed up there with the mineral baths, and all over Alabama in the late 1800s and early 1900s there were these kinds of resorts. Mm-hmm. And she talks about that, in the book, and all of those places she talks about are real places.
So you've got a kind of Huckleberry Finn coming-of-age book, only on a road in North Alabama instead of coming down the river.
Right. Well, it is, and I also wanted to make it those characters' books, not just Harold's book, and not just Harold coming of age and the way he comes of age, but those other characters kind of take over the book in a way,
Looking over your bibliography, and by the way, I'm only talking about volumes of work, not even thinking about book reviews and articles and pieces that you write incidentally. You have got to be one of the hardest working, most productive writers anywhere. Just anywhere. How do you do it? What kind of day do you put in that generates so much text?
I've been working at it all these years, and I think that's what really does it. When I sit down at the computer, I work. I go. There's no dilly-dallying around. I spend early in the morning. I go into the computer and go to the New York Times. I go to those few places, get that out of the way, have my coffee, come back, and I'm ready to go. Whatever I'm working on that day, I do it. People who know computers look at my desktop computer and say, my God, you got so much stuff on there. But I can go from different things that I'm working on. I have a collection of short stories that I'm putting together for the future. I published one 2 or 3 months ago, published one that you did with the Alabama Literary Review. All the same characters, the same people around Tuscaloosa and Alabama. And it just, that's one place. And then I've got another book over here, a nonfiction book that I'm working on, rewriting Montgomery history that I did about 12 years ago, but I found so much more stuff to put on there that into it, and it'll be published next year.
How many hours a day do you stay at it?
Oh, probably not over 4 anymore, not these days. I used to work 8 hours, you know, go 8 hours of writing at a time. I can't do that anymore.
That's all right. 4 is sufficient, and I'm going to let you go now. You can go back to work.
Okay.
This has been great fun. Thank you.
Thank you.